Hey guys, Waldock Studios here, and today we're going to do a continuation of a topic that seems to be blowing up YouTube. Does Unreal Engine 5 suck? And is it killing gaming? And are you doing it wrong? Um, I want to approach this topic carefully because apparently a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions about this. Um, And it also appears that when I just talk on the topic and make the assumption that people just know that um, whenever I speak on someone else's video and they're explaining like how you would go about doing something properly, which my response to the "you're doing it wrong," I just slapped a big not sign on there. And I talked about how some people are leaning towards wanting to bash the engine. And, Thread Interactive is one of the guys that is like very vocal about like modern day rendering and how, Epic is just destroying the gaming industry wholeheartedly all by themselves. And I also spoke on how I don't necessarily agree with the stance, but I can't discredit some of the points and subject matters, upscalers, TAA, modern rendering techniques, and how there's some problems there. But most people know that with any rendering method, no matter what, you're gonna have some trade-off. It's just the nature of the game. And same thing with covering the state of the industry. In my previous video where I spoke on Dallas, excellent dude, by the way, very friendly guy. Him and I align in the sense that I think that we're both trying to help the community and teach skill sets. And in all fairness, the the thing that I wanted to point out is that I don't agree with videos that swing so far in the other direction where they just want to tell every developer that's using Unreal Engine that the reason why every game that sucks is because developers are doing it wrong. And my point was that things don't exist in a vacuum. And if you've watched the ninth gen State of the Gaming Industry, you'll understand my stance on this. As an industry right now, we're in an impasse. Basically, we're in the middle of a transitional process where we have partial implementation into a new engine and we have the desire or the need, I don't even want to say the desire, the need for studios to be able to hit two target markets. If you come into a generation, anyone who's been making console games long enough knows that if you come into a new console generation and you basically don't try to capture the previous generation, you're gonna hurt. Yeah, it's gonna be painful, and it's not just on you or your decisions. It's basically on the survival of your studio and also leadership and C-seats and board members and publishers. There's a lot of bureaucracy and politics at play, and I cover a lot of that. But a lot of people were like, you didn't give any examples, so I figured I would start here and show people that I've been doing tutorials on Unreal Engine, how to hit retro markets, how to do virtual production, how to do sequencer, how to do 2D game development in UE5, fixing VR issues that have popped up over the different versions of UE5. I address multiple bugs with like the landscape tooling utility. I've been in the Epic ecosystem for a very long time, and I'm very familiar with the engine. And a lot of people, I can see that their responses are somewhat confusing because some people believe that UE5 is only targeted at ninth gen, or that like if you want to use Unreal Engine 5, you should only be looking at excuse me, PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series X. And that could not be farther from the truth. Or they basically said that Epic made the Matrix demo and all of these higher end rendering demos, and those demos don't exist on previous gen consoles. That's been some of the topics, and that is correct. But again, you're approaching these things from a vacuum. Epic marketed Unreal Engine 5, and as I stated in the last video, they marketed Unreal Engine 5 as a general purpose engine that was production ready for multiple targets. That doesn't just mean previous gen consoles, that means mobile and VR and PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and Xbox One and PlayStation 4. And they went to their flagship multiple times, which is Fortnite. And a lot of people forget like what an engine encompasses, right? My point, and I'm not throwing shade at Dallas. I love his videos. I love what he's trying to do, and he does teach Nanite and VSM workflow like really, really well, and he does speak on their pitfalls or downfalls. But let's just look at Epic's example that they set for the industry, Fortnite, right? It runs on previous gen consoles and it runs on modern day consoles. It uses Nanite, but then it uses LOD fallback. We can't look at this and be like, oh, we can just jump into a game and slap Nanite on everything. And that is my point. It's not the right answer for everything. And if you're a game developer who's trying to do what the industry requires of you for modern day generations, and a lot of people have said this, like technology isn't a linear line. But if you've already had a game that's released on the PlayStation, you already have LODs, you already have a previous gen framework. Epic didn't just update Fortnite by ticking a checkbox for Nanite. They support two different RHIs. They support DirectX 11 and DirectX 12. They also have a mobile platform. This isn't as easy as opening a project and checking a Nanite box and going, that works for everything. That's faster than the traditional rendering pipeline, because it's simply not true. And it seems like there is misconceptions. And I'm not trying to get like overly passionate here, but I really just want to correct the state of mind that a lot of people are in here. You still have to worry about billboarding trees in DX11 and SM5. There's a thing called a material layers feature switch that you have to put into all of your materials. You still have to worry about how many draw calls you're going to produce for platforms that can't just tick a Nanite checkbox. That is the reality of the state. And the thing that I spoke on in the Unreal Engine State of the Gaming Industry is that a lot of people had this misconception that we could just adopt UE5 and that it would just instantly make development lower cost, lower development cycles, and easier to push out games. And the point of the matter is that if you forgo all of the traditional rendering pipelines and you say, I'm not targeting 8th gen consoles or say the Steam Deck, you don't need to worry about lower target hardware at all, or you're only doing virtual production, or you're part of Hollywood studios that are trying to do like a 29 frame per second high-end rendering virtual production project within Unreal Engine 5, then you're absolutely correct. You don't have to worry about traditional rendering pipelines, but we're talking about games here. And the reality is that Unreal Engine 5 made the workflow a lot better and a lot easier for everything other than game studios that need to target multiple platforms. It's not even an ask at this point, it's a need. Not everybody has a 90 series card with frame generation and all of these upscaler technologies, and a lot of the younger, like, I don't want to, how do I phrase this? A lot of the older entry level 20 and 30 series cars, the 50s and the 60 series, basically 80% of the GPU market right now, they can't do the top end of what UE5 provides, not at a reasonable frame rate without cutting VRAM costs back. And what that means is you end up with a very low res textured game that looks like smeared mud. And the industry goes crazy, basically saying, I'm not seeing the visual fidelity increase that I expected out of this generation. And that's why everyone is up in arms. That's why everyone's having a conniption fit. That's why games seem like they run like crap. And it's a learning curve from developers and studios. It's epic understanding how to make the tooling better for people who have to work within both pipelines, because that process is a pain. Just plain and simple. And that's coming from someone who's done it, who works on multiple target platforms, who has to hit older consoles, who has to hit the Steam Deck, and who also does high-end rendering. You can't just forego one or the other. It means that just like Fortnite, you build on top of the previous gen. You still have the DirectX 11 fallback. You still have non-nanite meshes. You still have an HLOD workflow. You still use HLOD active groups, but you build on top of that with higher end meshes. And ask the artists that had to go re-topologize and recreate all those assets for nanite support how intensive that work was. And you tell me it somehow magically reduced the overall time that Fortnite took to create? No, that was additional cost and time, and that seems to be missed. So nothing's wrong with Unreal Engine. It's experiencing growing pains, and everybody pointing the finger at each other isn't going to help anything. We need to have real conversations about what the real issues are. And we have to also get away from the checkbox culture of going, we can check a box and that's going to fix everything, or magically make, time and cost disappear, because we're just not there yet. Maybe in another 5 years, when GPUs actually get stronger, or the frame generation techniques get to a place where they're not just artifacting all over the place. But we're simply not there yet. And what that means is developers have a responsibility to do things in a way that still run on the majority of people's machines. And the engine, Epic, has a responsibility to make sure that every release of UE5 is stable and doesn't involve a huge amount of overhead for each studio to have to fix a problem or overcome a blocker. That's all that's stated here. Yes, you can always go back to UE4. You can file for an exemption to go back older than even 427. But a lot of people think that you can just go back in time and there's no risk there either. There's deprecation, there's other external plugins and frameworks, and you have to fall in line with the latest console SDK binaries that they issue for each engine version. It's a nested and complicated thing. And I'm sorry if I don't cover these details or go over them broadly enough, but I assume that people would look into my videos where I've actually broken a lot of this down, and I talk about Unreal Engine 5 versus 4 for VR and mobile development. I talk about how to go back to retro-based frameworks or retro-based workflows. I talk about performance optimization. One of my biggest videos on my channel is how to actually target 8th gen and older platforms by stepping back through each RHI, each shader model, SM6 versus SM5, how to get Lumen software global illumination on DX11 without hardware, and how you can actually run this shading model on a Steam Deck with Lumen enabled and still hit 60 frames per second. So I apologize if I didn't take the time to kind of give a little bit more background about this from the beginning. I also want to set the record straight that Dallas's intent was not, I don't believe, looking through his entire video, his intent was not to tell everyone that you're doing it wrong for everything across the entire scope of the engine, which I have seen some of the comments point out, Dallas's intent, based on the context, was to explain that if you're going to use nanite as a workflow, there's a specific way that you have to implement VSM, SM6, DX11, nanite, and Lumen to fall in line with what Unreal Engine's rendering pipeline does very optimally versus the traditional HLOD method, which is still needed, by the way. If you need to hit those older targets, there are ways to implement that, and there's still ways to switch to billboards, etc., etc. Those things are still needed, but that was not just taking a second look at the context of the video, how it's explained, etc., etc. He was not encapsulating the entirety of Unreal Engine and saying, you're doing it wrong. This is the way you should do it going forward entirely for all targets, etc., etc. He mentions platforms. He mentions hardware. And at the end of the day, the best analogy, I've used this multiple times, the best analogy that I can give you is Unreal Engine scales very, very easily. And a lot of people don't even know this, but forward rendering is a base pass rendering that Unreal Engine supports. It's like a Lambo. It's quick, it's fast, it's agile. It's going to get you down to a 2 millisecond, 3 millisecond on a medium hardware. It's basically what Nintendo Switch uses for the most part, but it does not defer to a G buffer, the lighting data. So what that means is that you choke the forward rendering pass with dynamic light casting shadow actors. That's just the way it is. It starts out really, really fast, but it can't pull a load. It's a Lambo. It's got a lot of speed. It doesn't have a lot of torque. Then you have the deferred rendering path. It's got a G buffer. It can handle a lot of dynamic lights. That's like the pickup truck. And UE5 introduced VSM, SM6, Lumen, and Nanite with TSR. Nanite is like an 18-wheeler. It's slow. It's slower than any other pass. When you start that bad boy up, it's going to cost you a lot right out of the gate just by having DX12 and SM6 and Nanite enabled. But the more you add to its load, it's going to keep pulling. It's got a huge amount of torque. But the reality is you have to have the VRAM and you have to have the motor to even crank that bad boy up and start driving with it. That's the point. All of these things are still optimizations. They just happen at a different stage in the compute. And they also have a different fall off. If you want to be quick and nimble and you're not going to throw a lot of dynamic lights in the scene, use forward rendering. If you want to be quick, somewhat nimble, and have a lot of dynamic lights, and you don't have a huge triangle budget, use deferred traditional HLOD. If you have a virtual production scene or you're trying to get the best visual fidelity and the most densely packed triangle count in a scene, you're going to need nanite. That's how all of this works. And it's going to cost you upfront more for each shader model you increment, each DirectX RHI you increment, and each actual back-end rendering process that you implement. It's just, that is the way that this works. The trade-off is you fall off less quickly as you start tossing more and more into the scene. So, anyway, I just wanted to set the record straight on this, go over some of the videos that I've done, who I am as a studio, kind of what my background is and how I'm approaching this, and probably how me and Dallas are just simply approaching this from two different standpoints. He did say that he was going to keep into consideration some of the comments and responses that I made. Again, excellent dude, awesome content. Appreciate what he's doing. I recommend subbing to his channel. We have absolutely no issues with each other. But anyway, I want to thank my Patreon members and my Discord members and everyone who's taken an interest in this subject matter and who would like to know more. I'll get back into the swing of things. I'll be releasing more content. Drop a comment down below. Let me know what you'd like to see. Until next time, guys. Toodles.